just for you and me. The dogwood was never to grow strong and tall again. Well, we're going to start on episode number 22 now, and this is my name, of course, is Lonnie Jones, and this is my story, and a lot of it is what God did for me, and we'll talk some about alcoholism and all that kind of thing through our episodes as we go. And this is episode 22, and it's coming direct from Larry's Grand Old Garage at 549 East Maple Street, Madison, Tennessee. And of course, as you already know, Larry is a big name in Larry's Grand Old Garage because he used to own this as a transmission shop, and he didn't call it Larry's Grand Old Garage. I named it Larry's Grand Old Garage after his passing in his honor. And I'm gonna tell you about taking a trip with Larry. Larry carried us up to Forest City, Iowa, where they make the Winnebagos, and we're playing the KOA campgrounds, and people came up to us and asked us about playing the convention up at Forest City, Iowa. And it was, again, they build Winnebagos up there. Those are motorhomes. Well, they not only built the Winnebago motorhome, they built pull behinds, they built everything, but the big thing they were building back in those days was the Winnebago motorhome. They had the chieftains and the chief and the brave, and they had all that kind of different names for their motorhomes, and built them up in Forest City, Iowa. So anyway, we got a booking, Forest City, Iowa. So I got my band all together. At that time, I had a boy by the name of Phil Murphy playing steel guitar with me. And unbeknownst to me, Phil liked to smoke a little marijuana. Well, I of course learned that on the way up there. I didn't know much about Phil. He was a good old boy. He worked for Channel 8 TV out by the fairgrounds. That's where he worked out there. And he worked midnight shift, so he could go with me about anywhere, and he could play with me about anywhere. So I believe I carried Phil with me that year, and I could be wrong about that because Dave Macon also played steel guitar. He was my banjo picker, and he played steel guitar. And I don't remember for sure where Dave went with me and played the steel guitar or Phil Murphy did. But one of the two went with me and played steel guitar. Of course, my son, Ronnie Jones, and Dave Blood, I believe Dave Blood went with us. And Jim Gear went with us. And a lot of you know Dave Blood. He was here 2 weeks ago. Took some pictures. But Dave's a mandolin player and a terrific guy, could really put harmony together. Take a band that didn't know much about harmony, and he could get everybody to sing their part. Dave was very good at that. And Dave, a very good musician and a good singer. He and his wife and the daughter had a great band some time back. And but Dave was with us. We went to Forest City, Iowa, and we got up there. Of course, Larry, I don't think Larry ever went anywhere that Larry didn't get lost. But anyway, that's part of the fun, I guess. If you're not pushed for time, you can't get lost if you push for time. But we left a day early because we didn't want to be pushed for time. So we went, by the way, we went within 30 miles of Chicago going up there. And I don't know where that's right or wrong, but we went through cornfields after cornfields after cornfields. Nothing but straight roads. You think there's flat, straight roads in Texas. It's the same way in Illinois and Indiana. It's the same way up there. It's just, on both sides of it is corn. Corn. Well, of course, now they're raising a lot of soybeans, I think. But that's neither here nor there. So we drove, and I looked out the window, and it said, Chicago, 30 miles. Well, I was drinking back then, so I asked Larry, I said, what are we doing 30 miles from Chicago? He said, well, son, I missed that road right back there, so we're going to have to go this way to get there. So he got us straightened out. How we ever got anywhere, I'll never figure it out without GPS, because all we had was these maps, you know, these big old books you open up, and they had names for them. I forget, Atlas. I think Atlas was the big one. And we opened that book up and mark out the road we was going to go. Well, every now and then Larry missed what road. But anyway, we still went on to Iowa, and we got to go up, and I believe it's Des Moines, Iowa, is where the courthouse is at, and it looks like it's all copper. It looks like it's all copper. It's a state capital of Iowa, whatever that is. I don't know for sure what that is. But anyway, we got up there, and we drove up close enough to town, in the town, that we got to see the big, it looked like a copper dome. It looked like the dome in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, except it was copper. It looked copper. I don't know what it was. But it was beautiful. It was really, really, really pretty. So we went on up to the campgrounds where they were holding the concerts and everything. And they'd been holding that concert already, had been doing it for a week when we got there. So there were several other bands had performed. And so we got there, and our time was to perform at 7 o'clock that night. And when we pulled in there, there were Winnebagos as far as you could see in any direction. There's only one thing in Iowa they got more of than Winnebagos, and that's hogs. They got more hogs in Iowa, let me tell you right now, than they got Winnebagos, and that's saying a lot, because everywhere you look, they wasn't if it wasn't corn, it was hogs. So I got my lesson, learned my lesson about where most of the hogs I think come from was in Iowa. So we got on up there, and they told us what to do. So we got set up and everything at 7 o'clock. We looked out there, and the stands, they was 10,000 people there if they was one. There was people as far as you could see. There were people on bleachers. There were people sitting in chairs. It was the most magnificent thing that I'd ever played. I'd never played anything, nothing even similar to it, as that was. And of course, me being drinking and everything, I wasn't nervous. Wasn't nothing bothering me. I just had a big old time. And of course, I had a bunch of kids with me. Basically, Dave Blood was probably Dave Blood and Jim Garrett were the oldest two guys, and I had, if I'm not wrong, I had Janie McPherson with me, and of course Ronnie was just like 14 or 15 years old, and then we had Dave Macon. He was about 16 years old, and so it was me, and I was the oldest one of all, so I was the chaperone of the whole deal. I was half lit, but they all understood. Everybody took care of themselves. Everybody never had no trouble out. Everybody was fine with everything we had. So we got up there, and we was doing our show, and the people just absolutely went crazy of what we were doing. They hadn't had no bluegrass up there, and then we had that steel guitar and electric bass, and Ronnie had a set of drums, and we mixed all that up together, and man, that place went wild. Well, we got our show done, and we went to leave to go to the hotel room, because we had to come back to Nashville the next day to do a show down at the KOA campground. Well, they all got to crawling on the bus, all over the bus, up on the bus and everything. Nothing to do, but we must stay and do a show the next morning at 10 o'clock. Well, we had to talk to Larry about that, because we was, I don't know how far it was up there. I guess it was it's close to 1,000 miles probably up there. 800 to 1,000 miles from Nashville to Iowa. I don't know how far. I know one thing, we was close enough that we saw Green Bay, Wisconsin line. We was close enough to Green Bay, and Green Bay is up near the Canadian border, I think. Well, we were way up there. I don't know how far we was away. But we had to figure out how we could do a 10 o'clock show, a 45-minute 10 o'clock show the next morning, because they was going to pay us big bucks to stay there and do it. Because so far we was the best band that had. And they just really loved us. And so Larry done a little figuring, and he said, well, I'm going to tell you what we're going to have to do. He said, when we get done with this show, we got to leave. We got to leave then. Now, as soon as you get done with the show. And by the way, Larry would sing on our show too. And Larry had hands, huge, huge hands. And he couldn't hardly chord a guitar. But he'd get up there and do Chuck Berry stuff and Fast Domino stuff with that guitar. And he'd float across that stage, and he weighed about 350. But he floated across that stage like he weighed 100 pounds. And he just tore the people all to pieces. He was doing that Fast Domino stuff, Chubby Checker stuff. People loved him to death. So he said, when we get done with the show, we're going to have to leave immediately. We can't hang around. We got to head towards that because we're going to be pushing, because we had a show at 7 o'clock at the KOA campground on Saturday night. And this Friday morning. Or this was midday Friday, I guess it was. When we got done with the show, it was around midday when we pulled out of Forest City, Iowa. It was midday on Friday, and we had to do a show at 7 o'clock Saturday night at the KOA campground. So we did. We went back in there, and we did a 45-minute show, 10 o'clock the next morning. And there was as many people there at 10 o'clock as there was that night before at 8 o'clock. It's come from everywhere. Of course, there was so many people there. There was probably 200,000 people there. And there was 10, 15,000 of them at the show. But we did a show, and so we headed back. So we're driving, and everything looking pretty good. And so we have to stop and get gas. So by that time, I'm out of liquor. I'm out of liquor by then. Well, Larry's got his father-in-law with him, and he drinks like I do, drink like I did. We stopped to fuel up somewhere. I have no idea where. But I looked down the road, and about a block down there was a liquor store. So I got his father-in-law to go down to the liquor store and get us a fifth of whiskey apiece and bring it back. Of course, naturally, I had it made then. There wasn't no problem then. So he went down there. Time we got fueled up and everything, he ran down there and ran back and just got there in time for us to pull off. So we're continuing on, and we're driving, and it goes into the night. And just before sundown, we had a blowout in the middle of some big highway up there. I have no idea what highway it was or nothing, but we had a blowout, and tire went everywhere out in the middle of the interstate. And those cars out in that interstate was doing 65, 70 miles an hour. And I was out there trying to get that tire out of the road. Well, I should have left it alone. Shouldn't have tried nothing like that. But we didn't want somebody to run over and have a wreck and kill them. Well, I'm more about to get killed out there on the road trying to get the tar out of the road. But I finally get out there and get the tar out of the road. And Larry had a spare, so it took us about an hour to get all that changed around and get back on the road again. So we got back on the road, drove all night, and we got back into Nashville on time, in time, to do the show at the KOA campgrounds. But that was quite an adventure that we had. That's a long way to go, and we was on that old Flex bus. Remember, we've been talking about Flex buses. Well, Rita's dad's been doing some research on Flex buses, and Flex came from a three-wheel motorcycle with a sidecar on it. The sidecar would flex the way Mr. Schaefer said that it would come from, started out being a three-wheel motorcycle deal had a sidecar on it, and it flexed. So that's sort of where flexing came in, and where the bus got to flex. I think they went out of making motorcycles into making buses. But we're going to get off that because I'm not too sure what all he told me about that. But we got back into Nashville, and we did our show at 7 o'clock at the KOA campground. And that was one of our trips there. Then while we were talking about trips with the old Flex bus, we did another trip right after that. We went up into East Tennessee, Johnson, Johnsonville. It wasn't New Johnsonville because that's down West Tennessee. This was Johnson City, Tennessee, which is up near Bristol, Tennessee. We had a show to do up there, and we did that show with Jim and Jesse. I can't think of who all. Conway Twitty's daughter had a band up there, and that played. And there's a little story behind that into this as well. And but it was Jim and Jesse and Conway Twitty's daughter, and I don't remember what her name was exactly. And then I can't think of the banjo picker's name. He was an Indian banjo picker, and his claim to fame was Whoa Mule Whoa. Raymond Fairchild. Raymond Fairchild was there. He was the banjo picker. So we had Raymond Fairchild, Jim and Jesse, Lonnie Jones, and then we had Conway Twitty's daughter. Well, that's pretty good ways up to Johnson City, Tennessee. I tell you it is. Pretty good ways. You go on through Knoxville and you just keep it going. You almost get into another state before you get done. But anyway, we went up there, and it was out in the middle of a big field, and they only had it there one or two times prior to that, so there wasn't no huge crowd. There was probably 300 or 400 there, but there wasn't no huge crowd. But we talked to Jim and Jesse and everything, and just had a big old time, and did that show, and we came back, and that was went up there on that. That was on the old Flex bus as well, and then of course I've done told you about going to Monticello. I'm trying to think of some more places we went on the old Flex bus that would be interesting to tell you where we went. It wasn't too long after that till he got rid of the Flex bus. He bought a MCI. I don't know what MCI means or stands for, but don't know much about buses. Rita knows more about campers and buses than I do, because we have a motor home, and Rita goes through and finds out what all of them are, what they do, who makes them, and all that stuff. So I don't know what the MCI bus was, but that was a big upgrade from what we had. The old Flex bus, by the way, it still had its seats in it when we was riding around in it. It was at one time like a Greyhound bus, like it would run from Centerville to Dixon. I'm not saying that bus did, but buses like that would run from one small town to another, and so it still had its seats in it. Well, when we got the MCI bus, it had been made into a musician traveling bus, so it had cots in it. It had 3 cots on each side, and then a bedroom back in the back, and then some couches up front. So it was a lot more comfortable, actually, than the old Flex bus was. And I think I've already told you about going to out in Missouri and doing a chauffeur for Shoney's. I'm pretty sure I've done told you that story. So I pretty much don't remember much more that we did with a Flex bus than that. It became where we started going then. We started using the Flex of the MCI bus, and we'd travel in the MCI bus. Well, we continued to play the campgrounds, of course. I played every campground that's ever been on Valley Drive. I played every one of them. I played Ernest Tubb Midnight Jamboree out there. We used to, they used to let us play before the Jamboree on Saturday nights. They'd even let us do Friday nights out there a lot of times. And so that was in the old one, the old Ernest Tubb Midnight Jamboree out there was sitting out there where there's a strip mall at now, and when you watch the Midnight Jamboree from out there, if you couldn't get inside, they had these walls that had hinges on them that would raise up, and they'd prop them up, and you could stand outside and lean up lean into the windows like there and see all the musicians and see everybody. And that was the old Midnight Jamboree before they built the one they have now and have had for quite some time. But we played every place you can play. We played. I played for about every machine shop was in Nashville at Opryland when Opryland first opened up, because Opryland is a convention center, and they have all kinds of restaurants inside Opryland, and we got to play for all the machine shops. Machine shops have they'd have parties for Christmas, they'd have Thanksgiving parties, whatever, and they would call me and my band to go out and play at the Opryland for all the tool and die shops, machine shops. Not all of them, but a tremendous amount of them. And we would go out there and play at all those restaurants, and when they'd hold their conventions, and that was back in the 70s when all this was going on. And back in the 70s, I believe gas was 35 cents a gallon. It's about what gasoline was. And speaking of gasoline, we were talking about gasoline the other day over at Hardee's. Of course, we talk about everything at Hardee's, because that's just for the nursing home, or you die. Everybody goes over to Hardee's and tells all the lies that they can tell and all the truths they can tell. That's where we was at. So I asked somebody the other day, did anybody over there remember 12 cents a gallon gas? And there was a couple of folk up, and one 80-something years old, two of them 80 years old, could remember 12-cent gallons of gas. Well, the reason it was 12 cents a gallon is back in the 50s, they would have gas wars in Nashville. And I was living with my sister over in the projects on Murfreesboro Road, and down on Murfreesboro Road, they had these little small service stations, and they would have these gas wars, and it'd be 15 cents, and then down on up yonder, he'd go down to 14 cents, the next he'd go down to 13 cents. So there's about 5 or 6 of them down there. Everybody knows where the barbecue was on Murfreesboro Road. I'm sure most everybody knows where that was at. And the Drake Hotel, I remember waking up in the projects every morning, and when I woke up, I looked out the window, and Drake's Hotel on Murfreesboro Road set up on the ridge right there at Federal Lane, where Federal Lane come out. And the first thing I seen was that big sign saying Drake's Hotel. And right there also next to it was where the barbecue was at. The very first barbecue that there was right there. And when I left living with my sister, I moved out near there on 9th Lane into an apartment by myself when I left the projects. But anyway, back to playing all different places. We played the Opryland Hotel a tremendous amount of times for conventions, mostly machine shops and tool and die shops, because they knew me, knew my father-in-law. He had his own shop and everything. So that's how I got convention jobs, mostly is through them. Of course, we played 2 or 3 different ones beside machine shop, but that's mostly what it was. And it wasn't no like it is now when they have a convention. Now there's 10,000 people shows up to the convention. Now back then, if you had 2,000 or 2,500 showed up, it was a big convention. But since we're talking about the Opryland Hotel, what I will do is also I'll tell you about, I worked at Opryland Hotel. And on my next program, I'll tell you about me working at the Opryland Hotel, because I worked out there with a friend of mine, which he was on stage here the other night playing steel guitar, and his name was Ray Manger. But now Ray played steel guitar for me at the campgrounds long before he went to work at Opryland. He was an engineer, and he was at Opryland working in engineering and maintenance because he had a degree of some kind. So he was working out there, and prior to that, he was working for me playing steel guitar. But anyway, I'm going to let it go at that on number 22. We'll come back on episode 23 and talk about working for Opryland. And don't forget the Friendship Missionary Baptist Church at 101 um, Flat Ridge Road in Goodlettsville, Tennessee. Nelson Garrett is our minister there, and we'd love to have you there on Sunday about 11 o'clock if you could do it. If you can't come, well, tune us in on Facebook, because we'll be on Facebook, and we'd love to see you in church on Sunday, okay? And we'll get a couple of songs together for you, play a couple of numbers for you right quick, and then we'll go on to number 23. We'll go to episode 23. And we thank you, and we'll see you on number 23. Anyway, everyone calls the Black Diamond Strings. If you never had a guitar, you probably never had a Black Diamond String. So we're going to give it a whirl. My first guitar was a loner. All off ran because let me keep. Back when I was learning how to play, like the boys in Tennessee, set up every night and picked it, till my fingers turned green, till I learned how to make her talk on them Black Diamond Strings. Daddy showed me three chord Jimmy Steele, he taught me how to play. He showed me the G-run I'm still using today. Well, I thought it must be magic, the way he made it rain. But he said it ain't no secret, son, it's them Black Diamond Strings. I don't know if they still make them. Back then they were the best, and the good kind didn't cost much, $2.95 a cent. Back before I met Payoff, chased my hillbilly dream. All it took to make me happy was a old guitar and Black Diamond String. My share of troubles too, but if I could do it all again, oh, you know just what I'd do. If I could have one wish, take a track back in a time machine to the day I learned to play the wildwood flower on the Black Diamond String. I don't know if they still make them. Back then they were the best, and the good kind didn't cost much, $2.95 a cent. Back before I left Payoff, chased my hillbilly dream. All it took to make me happy was an old guitar and Black Diamond String. Before I left Payoff, chased my American big dream. All it took to make me happy was an old guitar and Black Diamond String. Black Diamond String. It's called Only the Wind. She would sit by her window and gaze out down the road where children had gone. One by one they left seeking their fortune, and left their dear old mother all alone. Sometimes late at night she would call me, sir, did I hear a knock
at the door. I would say it was only the windman, just as I had told her before. It's only the wind. Your children are not at the door. It's only the wind, restless wind, nothing more. Oh, play pretty dog. Sometimes she would talk of her children, of her son and her daughter so fair. She said they were much like the wild wind. They sometimes neglected to care. One night I heard somebody knocking, but I saw as I went to the door, she was there in her chair by the window, her eyes closed and rest forevermore. It's only the wind. Your children are not at your door. It's only the wind, restless wind, nothing more. That is an awful pretty song, isn't it? Jesus died on the cross from a dogwood tree. He gave his life and soul just for you and